What if the love of your life was sitting at the wrong table and didn't even know it? What if everything changed, not with a kiss, but with crayons and spilled juice? He was a billionaire hiding in plain sight. She was a librarian who thought she was meeting someone else. No one expected the woman with a tote bag and spaghetti sauce on her sleeve to change a CEO's life. But when she sat down across from him and didn't ask about money, fame, or status, everything he thought he knew about love fell apart, and something real began. This isn't a story about riches. It's a story about being seen, about choosing. Presence over perfection, and how sometimes the wrong table leads you to the right forever. It's easy to assume you know someone at first glance, a man in worn jeans juggling twin toddlers, a frazzled look in his eyes, a hand-me-down diaper bag slung across his shoulder. No luxury watch, no chauffeur waiting at the curb, no polished introduction. But what if that man quietly owned half the skyline you see on your way to dinner? What if he wasn't broke at all, but just wanted to find someone who saw the father before the Forbes profile? This story doesn't start with a luxury jet or a gala. It starts with spilled orange juice and crayons in a diner booth. Because sometimes the most life-changing love stories begin at the wrong table with the right heart. On a cloudy Thursday evening, Nolan Chase stepped into a downtown family bistro carrying his 4-year-old twin daughters, Liv and Lila. The hostess raised a curious eyebrow, not out of judgment, but surprise. "You brought your kids on a date?" she asked quietly, tilting her head. Nolan nodded with practiced calm, settling the girls on his hips. "It's not really a date," he said, half smiling. "Just dinner." In truth, it was supposed to be a blind date set up through a parenting app until the woman ghosted him 30 minutes before. Her final message? "Sorry, can't date a broke dad of 2, best of luck." Nolan didn't reply. He didn't explain that he wasn't broke at all, that his low-profile clothes and the borrowed 2008 Corolla in the lot were intentional. He just wanted to meet someone who wasn't impressed by his net worth. Tonight was about stripping it all back. No suits, no titles, just the man and his girls. He was about to gather them up and call it a night when the door jingled behind him. A woman entered rushing, rain-dotted, cheeks pink from the cold. She wore a simple blue cardigan, a canvas tote slung on one shoulder, a paperback poking out the top. Her name was Josie Calder. "Hi," she said, scanning the room, eyes darting to her phone. "Sorry I'm late." The bus was ridiculous. Nolan blinked. She didn't look like the usual dates he'd been sent: high heels, rehearsed smiles, questions about inheritance. Josie had a nervous energy, but not the calculated kind, the real kind. Her gaze landed on his table, 2 girls in booster seats, one shaking a salt packet like maracas. "You're Nolan, right? Window table, 2 wild accessories," she joked, pointing to the kids. He hesitated, then smiled. "Yeah," he said quietly, "that's us." He knew she had the wrong table, but something about the way she said it, unfazed, warm, curious, made him stay silent. Maybe it was the way Liv extended a purple crayon toward her, or the fact that Josie didn't recoil. She just sat down. "I'm Josie," she said, setting her tote gently by her feet. "And that's a great shade of purple, by the way." Liv grinned. Lila nodded solemnly and handed her a napkin. "Draw a cat," and Josie did badly. But the twins laughed like it was magic. Nolan watched, stunned. Every other woman he'd introduced to his daughters had felt awkward or tense, trying to impress him instead of engaging them. Josie didn't try. She simply was. No pretense, no strategy. Just present. As the server arrived and spaghetti flew and napkins disappeared beneath the chaos of twin energy, Josie never flinched. When orange juice splashed on her sleeve, she just laughed and told a story about falling into a birthday cake at the library. The twins howled with laughter. Nolan watched, listened, felt something loosen inside his chest. It had been years since something felt this easy, this real. Not once had Josie asked what he did for a living. Not a word about where he lived or what he drove. She asked the twins about their favorite animals, listened to a detailed story about a magic bug rock, and when she caught Nolan looking at her, really looking, she smiled. Not flirtatiously, not coy. Just openly, genuinely, a kind of smile that doesn't ask for anything in return. When the server placed the check early, "Dessert's next," he said politely, Nolan reached for his back pocket. Then froze. These weren't his jeans. This wasn't his car. And he wasn't sure he had even brought his wallet. For a split second, panic tightened his throat. He looked down, calculating his next move, when Josie, with perfect calm, slid her card to the server. "It's okay," she said, brushing her hair behind one ear. "I've had way worse dates." Nolan turned toward her, stunned. "You didn't have to." "I know," she replied gently, "but I wanted to. You looked like you could use a little kindness." That sentence, it cracked something open in him. This wasn't about the bill. He could buy the entire restaurant, probably the building, too, but she hadn't paid out of pity. She paid because she cared. In that moment, Nolan Chase, the billionaire venture capitalist with 5 tech firms and a house on every coast, was just a tired dad in a diner. And Josie Calder saw him. Not his resume. Not his bank balance, him. That night after the diner emptied and the neon flickered outside like a heartbeat on pause, Nolan offered Josie a ride home, half hoping she'd say yes. But knowing full well his borrowed Corolla didn't exactly scream charm or comfort. "It's not fancy," he said, rubbing the back of his neck with a sheepish smile. "But it'll get you there." Josie peeked out the window at the drizzle-soft sidewalk and shook her head gently. "I like walking, clears my head, and—" Just like that, she left with a wave to the twins and the memory of a dinner Nolan hadn't known he desperately needed. As he strapped Liv and Lila into their car seats, their small hands still sticky with crayon smudges and garlic bread, he caught sight of a napkin drawing fluttering on the dashboard, a wobbly sketch of a cat with too many whiskers, scrawled names at the bottom, Josie plus Liv. His throat tightened. Not because of the artistry, but because of what it represented. A moment unfiltered, a flicker of healing he hadn't expected. He hadn't let anyone that close in years, not since Carolyn passed, not since the laughter in his home had turned into echoes and bedtime became a battleground between exhaustion and sorrow. Josie had walked into that chaos and somehow steadied it without even trying. She hadn't tiptoed around his grief or pitted him for his parenting. She'd simply sat down, shared a napkin, and listened like his life wasn't something broken, but something alive, tender, messy, and still worth knowing. for 4 days. He thought about that smile, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she paid the bill, the way she remembered to look every person at the table in the eye, especially the littlest ones, and then he remembered she said she worked at the library near Pine Street, the one with the red doors. Saturday morning arrived, and Nolan packed the twins into the car under the guise of book hunting. But really, it was hope, quiet, foolish, persistent hope. When they arrived, the red doors looked like a promise, and inside, the scent of paper and possibility wrapped around them like an old blanket. Children sat cross-legged in the storytime nook, and there she was, her voice soft but animated, reading to a room full of children like it was the most sacred task on earth. Liv gasped, "That's her." And before Nolan could stop them, the twins darted forward, plopping themselves right into the circle. Josie blinked, startled, then smiled as if she'd been waiting for them. "Quick break, everyone," she said, standing up and walking toward him. "You found me." Nolan nodded, swallowing. "You left a pretty good trail, crayons, cat drawings, and kindness." She didn't laugh, but her eyes did. "I didn't mean to crash your night," he said quietly, "but I couldn't. Stop thinking about it, about how you made them laugh, about how you made me ... Breathe." She studied him, guarded but not closed. "You looked scared that night," she said. "Not of me, of what it meant to feel something again." He nodded. "I've been holding my breath for so long I forgot how to exhale." Josie looked down, her voice gentler now. "I don't care about what you have, Nolan. I never asked because I didn't need to know. I saw you. That's enough." His jaw tightened. The words caught somewhere between confession and gratitude. "I didn't lie," he whispered, "but I also didn't tell you everything. I didn't think it mattered because for the first time, someone was sitting with me for who I was, not who the world sees." Josie crossed her arms. "But it wasn't defiance, it was protection. It did matter," she said, "because if we're going to do this, I need to know the real things, not just the beautiful ones." He nodded again, slower this time. "Then here's a real thing. I've missed you since the second you walked away from that table." She didn't answer, just stood there, torn between risk and return, until Liv tugged at her hand and said, "Draw with me again?" And Josie, despite everything, knelt beside her and picked up the crayon. It started quietly, not with declarations or decisions, but with visits to the library that became routine, first on Saturdays, then Tuesdays. Then, whenever Nolan just happened to be in the neighborhood with 2 curly-haired accomplices and a flimsy excuse about overdue books. Josie pretended not to notice, at least not right away. But her smile always widened when she saw them, and the twins Liv and Lila ran to her like she was a favorite chapter they wanted to reread. They met once at the park too, where Josie read aloud from a children's novel under the soft shade of an oak tree, while the girls tumbled through the grass like poetry in motion. Nolan watched from a bench nearby, holding a juice box like it was a passport to a world he'd long been exiled from. Something was shifting, not quickly, not with the rush of romance, but slowly, like morning light creeping across a quiet room. And then came the note, not from Nolan, but from Liv and Lila. A folded paper dropped into Josie's mailbox, wrapped in napkins and hope. The handwriting was crooked, letters like playground swings. "Dear Miss Josie, come eat dinner with us. We made drawings and cookies. Love, Liv and Lila, and Daddy too. Josie stared at it for a long time, fingers trembling not from fear, but from the unfamiliar feeling of being wanted not for her usefulness, not for performance, but for her. Presents, that Sunday, she said yes. Nolan drove them to a modest cottage at the edge of town, a house that looked like memory flower pots on the porch, wind chimes tinkling in the breeze, and crayon drawings taped to every wall inside. This was my mom's place, Nolan said softly. I never changed it. It's where I go when I want to be just ... Dinner was spaghetti again because the girls insisted, and Nolan wore an apron that said, "Kiss the cook," like a dad from a sitcom, pretending not to notice when sauce landed on his shirt. Josie helped pass the bread and asked the girls about books, favorite dinosaurs, and why bedtime should be negotiable. She never checked her phone, never drifted away from the moment afterward. Nolan brought out a box of board games while Josie helped tie Liv's shoelaces and clean up spaghetti splatter from the walls. As she leaned down, she noticed Lila's bangs falling into her eyes and instinctively reached out, brushing them back and clipping a small pin in place. "There," she whispered. And Lila smiled like she'd just been chosen for something sacred. Nolan stood in the kitchen doorway drying a plate, his chest aching from the quiet gravity of this scene, not because it was dramatic, but because it wasn't. This wasn't a performance. It was peace. "They trust you," he said later as they folded napkins together. "I've never seen that happen so fast." Josie looked at him, surprised. "I don't know what I'm doing most of the time," she admitted. "I just care. That's all they've ever needed," Nolan said, his voice low. And when the girls were finally asleep, wrapped in a tangle of stuffed animals and dreams, Nolan walked Josie to the porch, the wind chime above them whispering like a lullaby. "You're different here," she said quietly. "You're not trying to be anything." "That's the only place I want to live now," he replied. "In the version of life where trying isn't pretending." She stepped a little closer. "You don't have to prove anything, not to me, not to them," Nolan exhaled. "That's what scares me the most, that this is real. Then don't run from it," she said, and he didn't. It only takes one photo to shift a narrative, one grainy frame taken through leaves, one unsuspecting moment frozen in time, and suddenly the truth you've been quietly nurturing is swallowed by assumptions louder than your voice. That photo appeared on a Tuesday morning. No context, no caption beyond a headline dripping with curiosity. It showed Josie Calder canvas bag over one arm, holding hands with Liv and Lila as they skipped down the sidewalk outside the Pine Street Library. Josie was smiling, the girls were laughing, and that was enough to light a match. By noon, her name was trending. By evening, her doorstep was a minefield of reporters, cameras, speculators, and microphones trying to rip open a life she'd never volunteered to be public. Within hours, the media machine did what it does best, reduce people to puzzles and storylines. And Josie became the mystery woman, then the librarian linked to billionaire Nolan Chase, and finally, the woman who doesn't belong. Nolan watched helplessly as the noise grew. Not around him, he was used to it, but around her. Someone who never asked for cameras or questions. Someone who paid for a dinner without knowing she was dining with a headline. He called. She didn't answer. Not because she didn't care, but because she didn't know how to breathe under that weight. The next morning, her library director called her into a small office. "There's been pressure," he said, eyes cast down. "From a donor. From the board. They're concerned about optics. Josie stood still, holding her hands tightly in her lap. I haven't done anything wrong, she whispered. I know, the director said quietly. But right now, they don't care about right and wrong, just quiet. And just like that, the job she had built her life around, the safe space she'd given to hundreds of children, was taken away. That night, she packed her things in silence, closed her apartment blinds, and stared at the crayon drawing still taped to her front door. We miss you. Miss Josie. Crooked hearts and uneven lettering from two little girls who didn't understand the politics of reputations, only the ache of absence. Nolan sent messages, dozens, but none felt right. Because how do you apologize for the world swallowing someone whole? He wanted to fix it, wanted to drive over and pull the press from her doorstep like weeds. But she had already made it clear what she needed now was space, and yet when your daughters ask about someone every night, when they whisper her name into their bedtime prayers, space becomes a kind of torment. 3 days passed, and on the 4th, Nolan did something he hadn't done in years. He walked straight into the storm. Reporters lined Josie's block, cameras flashing as he stepped out of a black SUV with no entourage, no prepared statement. Just a coat flapping in the wind and resolve anchoring his steps. He stood at the base of her apartment stairs and looked up, knowing she was watching from the window above. His voice was steady, but cracked just enough to make it human. Josie, he called, I can't change the world, but I can stand between you and it. I can take the questions, the chaos, the cameras, but only if you let me. The crowd hushed. Mike's leaned forward. Inside, Josie stood frozen, her hand on the doorframe, tears pooling in her eyes. Her voice was barely a whisper as it passed through the closed door. You have to protect your daughters, she said. Don't let them get caught in this. Nolan's reply was immediate. They already are, because they miss you, because they ask for you, because this isn't just about me anymore, it's about us. A silence stretched between them, thick with things unsaid, until finally Josie's voice came again, small, pained. I didn't ask for this. I know, Nolan said, but neither did we, and yet, somehow, this became the most real thing in my life. Her fingers hovered over the lock, trembled, but didn't turn it. I'm sorry, she said, but I need you to go. And so he did, step by step, past flashing bulbs and shouted questions, and Josie sank to the floor. Behind the door, the world too loud to let her hear the sound of her own breaking heart. Some doors don't slam shut, they stay ajar, held open by hope, by the fingerprints of tiny hands who don't understand why someone disappears, only that they do, and miss them anyway. For 3 days Josie walked past the crayon drawing still, taped to her front door. We miss you, Miss Josie. Its purple hearts fading just slightly at the corners. Each time her hand brushed against the paper, her chest tightened, but she said nothing, did nothing. Because how do you walk back into a life when you've convinced yourself that leaving was the right thing? Across town, Nolan's house had grown quiet, not the comforting kind of quiet, but the hollow kind, the kind where bedtime stories are shorter, giggles echo longer. And 2 little girls asked the same question every night. Is Miss Josie coming back? On the 3rd night, Emma climbed into his lap, her eyes rimmed with uncertainty. Did we do something wrong? She asked, her voice barely a breath. Nolan's heart broke in 2, and he pulled her close, whispering, No, sweetheart, You did everything right." And when he tucked them in that night, he found them both at the kitchen table the next morning, surrounded by crayons, quiet and focused when they finished. Ella held up their drawing, 3 stick figures holding hands, hearts floating above them, the words scrawled in big crooked letters, "We bring our hearts." Nolan looked at it for a long time. Then he stood. "We're going to see her." They dressed quickly, their shoes on the wrong feet, their hair half brushed. And Nolan parked 2 blocks away to avoid the lingering press, carried the drawing like it was a peace treaty, and walked to her apartment with the weight of both daughters tucked under his arms. The old drawing still fluttered on her door, faded now but unforgotten. He knocked, gently, then again, then waited. Ella looked up. "Is she home?" "We'll find out," he said, and bent to help them tape the new drawing beneath the old one, then stepped back, letting them stand in front of the door alone, arms wide, ready for a hug they weren't sure would come. Inside, Josie had been organizing books, or at least pretending to. Really, she was trying to outrun the quiet, to silence the guilt that had settled like dust on every surface of her apartment. And then she heard it, the knock, the muffled laughter, the unmistakable sound of hope just outside her walls. She opened the door slowly, and there they were, their arms still outstretched, their faces lit with something she hadn't seen in days. Trust. She dropped to her knees, tears already spilling, and the girls ran into her arms. No hesitation, no questions, just belonging. "I missed you," Josie choked out. "So much." Nolan stood a few feet back, not intruding, waiting to be invited in. When she looked up, he spoke softly. "I didn't come with headlines or promises or apologies," he said. "Just this, my heart and theirs." She stood slowly, still holding the girls. "Why did you really come?" "Because I can live without fame or wealth or calm," he said. "But I can't live without this, not anymore." She searched his eyes and then whispered, "I thought I was protecting you by leaving. You were trying to protect us by disappearing," he replied. "But all it did was leave us hurting in silence." She opened the door wider, not dramatically, not tearfully, just enough for him to step into a space that was no longer just hers. The girls clung to her legs and Nolan stepped inside, slowly, carefully. And the 4 of them stood there, no cameras, no questions, just the sound of hearts choosing one another again, and this time no one let go. Life didn't go back to what it was before. It became something better, quieter, more honest, not built from Instagram-worthy moments or magazine headlines, but from things that don't photograph well. A hand brushing crumbs from a child's cheek, a laugh shared over burnt toast, a story read for the 3rd time just because the girls loved the ending. Josie didn't move in, not right away, not officially, because what they were building didn't need urgency. It needed roots, and Nolan understood that. He didn't push, didn't rush her into his world of chauffeured town cars and calendar reminders. Instead, he came to hers, the little apartment above the bookstore on Pine Street, the one with windows that squeaked when you opened them and a kettle that hissed like it was whispering secrets. And sometimes, when the nights were soft and the girls were already tucked in at his cottage, she stayed, not because she had to, but because she wanted to, because she finally felt safe to. They moved slowly, intentionally, because love that lasts doesn't always arrive fast. It arrives right. When you stop trying to protect yourself from it. One night, wrapped in a throw blanket and sitting on the porch swing, Nolan asked gently, If you could do anything, anything at all, what would it be? Josie leaned her head against his shoulder, thinking, then said, I'd start a reading program for the kids who hide in libraries after school because they don't want to go home. For the ones whose parents work double shifts and never have time to read bedtime stories. For the ones who never get asked what book they love most. Nolan didn't hesitate. Then let's build it. And so they did. They called it Story Nest. A traveling mobile library that brought story time to community centers, shelters, underserved schools. A van wrapped in illustrations and filled with beanbags and picture books and volunteers who knew how to listen. Josie curated every shelf, trained every reader, chose books like they were spells designed to open hearts, and Nolan funded it quietly. No interviews, no ribbon cuttings, just press releases that focused on the impact, not the benefactor. Because this wasn't about redemption or reputation. It was about giving back something real at home. The rhythm of their days settled into a beautifully ordinary cadence breakfast battles over cereal versus pancakes, spontaneous dance parties in the kitchen, weekend art shows made entirely of crayon stick figures. Josie became the constant the girls didn't know they'd been waiting for. She was the calm in the bedtime storm, the gentle hand on a scraped knee, the voice they asked for when nightmares curled under their pillows. Nolan often stood in the hallway just outside the girls' room, listening as Josie read with different voices for each character, the twins hanging on every word, and his heart swelled not with pride, but with gratitude, not the loud kind, the quiet kind. The kind that makes you say thank you in the middle of a sentence for no reason. Then one night, as the last page of a picture book was turned, and Josie tucked them in with their stuffed animals arranged like an audience, Lila yawned and asked, Miss Josie? Yes, sweetheart. Can I call you Mama Josie? The room went still. Josie's eyes filled instantly, her voice caught, and she dropped to her knees beside the bed. If that's what you want, then yes. Emma leaned over, reaching out. Me too? Always, Josie whispered Nolan. Stepped into the room, knelt beside them, and took her hand, saying nothing. Because nothing was needed, the girls fell asleep holding on to her fingers, and in that moment, she wasn't a visitor or a guest, she was home. 1 year later, everything and nothing had changed. Josie still lived above the bookstore on Pine Street, the one with the creaky staircase and the smell of old stories in every floorboard. She'd gone back to the library not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Because her name had finally faded from the gossip columns and settled into something steadier. Someone who showed up. Someone who gave back. Someone who didn't run. Children still ran to her with dog-eared paperbacks and wide eyes, and when they asked if she was famous, she'd laugh and say, only to the ones who matter. Nolan never asked her to move into the estate, the sprawling mansion with more bedrooms than memories, because he knew she didn't need marble floors or private chef. She needed roots, not rooms, so they built their rhythm at the cottage. The one with wind chimes on the porch and crayon art on every wall. It wasn't polished. It was real. Some nights were loud with giggles and spaghetti sauce. Some were quiet with books and sleepy heads on shoulders. And through it all, they chose each other, not loudly, not dramatically, just consistently, and that's what made it real on a soft spring afternoon. They had a picnic in the backyard, nothing elaborate, just sandwiches, juice boxes, daisies. In a mason jar, the girls ran barefoot through the grass. tangled in daisy chains and sun, and Josie laughed so hard she had to wipe her eyes. Nolan had rebuilt the old wooden table from the night they first met, the wrong table with the right memories, and when she saw it, she tilted her head, smiling. "You brought back the wrong table. Some mistakes," Nolan said, grinning, "are worth keeping." After dessert, the girls disappeared inside, whispering conspiratorially, and came back with a tiny box wrapped in napkins. "For you," Emma declared, dropping it into Josie's lap. Inside was a ring made of soft rope and colorful beads, uneven and perfect. "We made it," Ella said. "It's your special ring." Nolan knelt beside Josie, his voice thick. "I used to believe I'd only be loved for what I had my name, my money, my empire. But then came the wrong table, 2 little girls, and a woman who looked past all of it and saw me." He took her hand. "I'm not asking for a headline or a perfect ceremony. I'm just asking this be you with us. With them, be the heart of this home." Josie looked at the ring, slipped it onto her finger, laughed through tears, and said, "We've been a family for a while now. You're just catching up." The girls squealed and circled them in a whirlwind of hugs and giggles. No camera flashes, no press releases, just sunlight, wind, and 2 children who had unknowingly crafted the most unexpected love story that evening as the sky turned gold and the porch swing creaked beneath them. Nolan whispered, "You weren't the wrong woman, you were the right one." Just sitting at the table no one expected. Josie leaned her head on his shoulder and replied, "And you were never the billionaire. You were the dad with kind eyes and spaghetti on his shirt." And in that quiet moment, under the ordinary glow of porch light, love didn't make an entrance, it stayed, because sometimes family doesn't form through bloodlines or ceremonies. It forms through bedtime stories, crayon hearts, and a woman who chose to see the man, not the legacy. Some stories begin with sparks and spectacle, but this one began with crayons and spilled juice, with a woman who sat at the wrong table and never looked back, with a man who had everything and didn't know what he was missing until he saw her. Wipe spaghetti sauce off her sleeve and laugh like the sound could heal him. The world never fully quieted. Not around them, not entirely, but they learned how to live louder than the noise. Josie didn't change to fit Nolan's world, and he didn't ask her to. Instead, they made a new world together, where bedtime stories mattered more than bottom lines, where a child's trust was the highest currency, and where showing up, day after day, was the most profound kind of vow. Their wedding wasn't written about in tabloids because it wasn't a wedding, it was a backyard picnic with lemonade, messy buns, and a string of paper hearts that Liv and Lila taped across the fence. Josie wore a blue cotton dress and the beaded ring the girls made. Nolan wore a white shirt he spilled ketchup on, and no one minded. They didn't say "I do" in front of hundreds. They whispered it in the hallway when they passed each other carrying laundry, over dishes, in the quiet moments before sleep when the world faded and it was just them. There were no press releases, no strategic announcements. Just 4 people in a small house with wind chimes, becoming something whole. Nolan still ran companies, still signed deals, but he no longer lived behind a headline, because now when someone asked what mattered most, he didn't think of numbers or board meetings. He thought of a tiny library above Pine Street, of 2 little girls saying "Mama Josie" like it was the most natural thing in the world, of a wrong table in a diner that turned out to be the most right place he'd ever sat, Josie never tried to be anyone else, and that was the gift. She didn't perform, didn't posture. She simply stayed. She built a home not out of money, but out of memories, out of banana pancakes and dog-eared storybooks and hugs that healed things too deep for words. And every time the world tried to reduce their love to a headline, they just looked at each other and remembered what it was really about, not the photo that went viral, but the moment afterward when Josie pressed her forehead to Nolan's and said, "We're still here, because being chosen is nice, but being stayed for is better." This wasn't a love story about being swept away. It was about being held still, about two people who didn't fall for each other. They stepped into something real, something whole, something they both had quietly needed for a long, long time. Sometimes love shows up quietly. It doesn't knock with diamonds or fame. It arrives in borrowed jeans, with a juice box in one hand and a heart still healing in the other. This story reminds us that love isn't built on appearances or timing. It's built on presence, on someone sitting across from you and not asking who you are on paper, but who you are when the kids are crying, when the room is messy, when life is unfiltered. If you've ever doubted whether your story could include something beautiful, remember this: the wrong table might be the exact place the right person is waiting. And sometimes showing up, even in the middle of your own chaos, is all it takes to begin again.